haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Welcome back to Cult Chat. It's great to have you joining us here today, and we're going to flick really quickly over to part 2 of an interview that Lindy did with Windy, Grendele and Savin Bapir-Tardy. So why don't we go over there now? Make sure you listen into part 1 if you haven't listened already, because the topic is essential. It's about mandated shunning. In our first episode, we looked at the definitions, gave a broad overview of what it is, and now we're going to have a deep dive into the impacts. Sit back and listen up.
Welcome again to you both, Dr. Savin and Dr. Windy. It's fantastic to have you here for part 2 of our discussion on mandated shunning.
Thank you.
How are you both doing?
Yeah, great. And I'm very happy to be here. Thanks again.
Oh, that's great. You're staying awake. It's your Friday night. I mean, for our viewers and listeners, if you haven't heard part 1 of this discussion, please do go back and listen to that now, because we really set the scene for our conversation now. And in part 1, we discuss, what is mandated shunning? What's meant by the term? What are the psychological and the practical impacts of it? And we hear a bit more from Windy and Savin about their research and interest in this topic. So it's, amazing to have you both here to talk about this. Couldn't have picked 2 better people from around the world to discuss this. So thank you both for being here. And I also encourage our viewers and listeners to check out the links that we will put at the end of the in the show notes that point to some more of their research and talks on this kind of a topic. So where we're going to go with this discussion today, ladies, is we're going to continue our discussion on mandated shunning, but I think we'll focus a little bit more on what's life like after leaving. Last time we talked a wee bit about the communities themselves, why they do shunning, and what the psychological and practical kind of tactics and impacts there are in that immediate process. But let's talk about, for the person who does leave, what's life like for them after shunning? Is it, just a one-off thing that impacts you at the time and then it's kind of gone? Or what are the lifelong or long-term impacts? Perhaps if you, either of you or both of you have something to share about the negative impacts as well as their hope for people who have, gone through such a devastating experience.
So, when going through such a extreme experience and impactful experience, people adopt different strategies to cope with this event. From the findings of our research and some previous research done on the coping mechanism, the coping styles depends in part on the individual's characteristics and traits. However, there are some common or commonalities across the experiences of being shunned. So, for example, it's an experience of loss, and sometimes the individual adopts some strategies that are not always helpful to the individual's well-being. For example, some individuals will do what they weren't allowed to do when in the group, and to the extreme. So, for example, binge drinking, or start using drugs, or using sex to in an effort to soothe the pain. And this is something really important to underline. So it's not for the sake of the behavior or being extreme, but it's in the effort of again trying to soothe the pain of losing meaningful connection and the social network. So these are some of the coping mechanisms that some people adopt in trying to normalize their new this experience and their new circumstances.
Windy touched on the coping mechanisms, and I think something that you said in your question, is it a one-off event? It's not a one-off event, actually, because once a person has been shunned by the community or the group, their whole life changes as they know it. So it means starting from scratch. And what happens, the aftermath of that, and it really is dependent on the circumstances, the reasons, all these play a role. Of course, in terms of psychological impact, it's devastating. For some people, it's so traumatic that they meet all the symptoms for a post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, also known as. Others may develop depression, anxiety. But those are symptoms of something real that is happening to them. It's not just because they're developing a mental health disorder. That is not the case. There's something real that is happening to them that has significant impact. So once an individual leaves, it's almost similar to that of a seismic event. So imagine it's an earthquake, your whole house shatters. What do? There's a period of mourning, of loss for that house, everything that you lost. You can rebuild another house, but you don't forget the old house, the memories that you had. Of course, you're going to try to make the new house stronger, that's what sometimes we mean by positives. But for some, I use that word very lightly. I'm not somebody that likes the words positive and negative, because it's aligned so much with the mentality of these high control groups. But I see it more as a process that can be described of growth. Because later in your life, you never forget about what it was like being in that group. For example, there are great milestones an individual goes through depending on the age that they left. So when you get married, when you have children, you still have that internal need to share that with somebody close to you. But if you have been shunned, you still continue to feel different from everybody else. You cannot tell your parents, you cannot share that with the ones closest to you. The people that you grew up with, you no longer contact them. It will forever impact your life. But it doesn't mean that that individual will be in this state of bereavement for the rest of their life. And I'm using that lightly because I know we used the term in part 1 of grieving the living. But for me, this process is more deeper than a bereavement, because in a bereavement, there is a real loss. Somebody has been lost, we grieve them, there is a process that we go through. In this type of bereavement, the people are still alive. But what you're also dealing with is the rejection. You've been rejected by the people that you, at one point in your life, you felt closest to. In some cases, your family, the ones that before anybody else should give you unconditional love. But it seems that there was only conditional love. So there was conditions placed into you. So now once you leave, you rebuild your life. There is a period of grief for what you have lost. There is a period where you feel you're the only person in the whole world, and you feel so lonely for each person, because realizing that there are other people going through that process at that point, it's not possible, because you came out from a group that it's this bubble, and you just came out of that bubble and you're discovering this whole new world. So a first step is for the individual to rebuild a sense of identity and self that is outside the group's beliefs, which takes a long process. An individual may find new interest in life that they didn't know before. And so that they discover new possibilities. But one thing I want to highlight to listeners who might not have experience of this, some people mix this with like a resilience almost. So imagine the wind blows on a tree, and the branch is bent. Once the wind stops blowing, the branch goes back to its original shape. But when we're talking about shunning, that branch gets cut off.
Yeah.
It falls out, a new branch grows in its place. And that's what we're talking about in terms of mandated shunning and in terms of growth. A new self grows.
Yeah, that's a really powerful metaphor to use of the severity of the change that happens. Yeah, it's not just that something's bent out of shape or under pressure for a short time. It's like a complete reorientation, isn't it? Which is a reorientation that's required because of destruction. Not just because of usually an intentionally chosen positive pathway. It's got this, it carries this, as you said, it carries usually trauma and destruction to it. So yeah, rebuilding has to be on top of those things. Do you see any differences at all in between the challenges and benefits for different genders, for men versus women? Or also I'm thinking about older people versus younger people when they experience the shunning, and then also children. Like I'm just thinking about the different demographics. Are there any patterns or any things that kind of stand out uniquely for any of those kind of categories, broadly speaking?
So it's an interesting question. I would say that, and then maybe we can develop this. Trauma is trauma, and the experience per se of being shunned is can be quite traumatic. We interviewed women, men, maybe not children, but young adults, and it stands out how the experience is for all of them a tough experience. Probably when we talk about children, because shunning, yes, sometimes is also applied to children. And here it's even more a traumatic experience. There are cases where, because already official members of some communities, and because they did something that the community again considered deviant or not according to the belief system or the norms of the community, these children were shunned with serious consequences. So
I would say that in those groups in general, women, children, and the elderly are far more vulnerable, because often in those high control groups, there's also a strong patriarchal ideologies and beliefs. If a woman is experiencing domestic abuse, where is she going to ask for help? If a child is being sexually abused, where are they going to go? They don't trust external services, mainstream services, to seek for help. So they are extremely, extremely vulnerable. And we know statistically worldwide, there is at least 1 in 4 women that experiences domestic abuse. And domestic abuse escalates it's a systematic, another pattern of abuse. And so they are extremely vulnerable. We have interviewed many participants who have been stopped, who have been sexually abused as children and were stopped from going to the police. And when telling their parents, they will go to the leaders of that group, and it will often be hushed down because of what it will mean to the group if they go out to seek help. The elderly, imagine somebody in this high control group who might suffer from dementia. They will often make the decisions for them, anything in accordance to the group, to fit the agenda of the group. There is no any consideration for any member's basic human rights. So anything takes precedence. All the group's beliefs, agendas take precedence over any human rights of its members.
Yeah, that's really interesting, this concept of human rights, because one of the things these groups do, as we know, is that, they kind of argue that, we're doing this for the protection and safety and well-being of our members, and they try and put a positive spin on it. And so sometimes it can be challenging to think, what is the core issue here? What is the problem? And I think the area of looking at what are the human rights, generally agreed upon principles of human rights for people, and what some of our countries legally have agreed to are human rights. That's a really helpful thing to look at to help us to determine exactly what is the problem. And you've got a particular interest in human rights, don't you, and how these groups can violate the individual human rights of a person.
Yes, so one of the aim of our research is to collect data or from different groups of experts. And some of these groups are human rights activists with an understanding of the topic, the mandated shunning, and how it violates the individual's human rights. And then another group is lawyers who are expert or understand the topic and are helping victims of bringing their cases in court. So again, the importance or the aim is to understand this phenomenon from different perspectives. This is because, as you mentioned at the beginning, there isn't yet an agreement on the terms to be used or the term to be used. So it's using or defining something is the starting point to understand what we are talking about. And when considering human rights violation or the challenges of bringing this topic in front of a legal court, we needed to agreement, a definition, what is this? And so the aim of this research is, to develop a theoretical framework considering different perspectives.
I want to add something for people to think about. It wasn't very long ago where domestic abuse was acceptable. It wasn't very long ago that people thought it was okay to hit their children. And I feel like this is where we are. And I do think that there will be a movement soon where legally in many countries globally, they will start recognizing this form of abuse, because that's what it is. It's an abuse. But currently, it's been kind of protected under the umbrella of freedom of religion, or and many of those organizations sometimes also have a charity status. But our research is aimed at highlighting where are the current limitations when it comes to criminal convictions. So when somebody's human rights have been violated under this umbrella of a religion, where are the limitations? Why are we not seeing more countries and more successful prosecutions? And I do think we're moving towards that way. But let's not forget that there is so many types of abuses that before used to be considered normal. It was normalized. And this is what's happening with shunning, because it's done under the umbrella of religion. It's somehow normalize that religion is their problem, but in fact, it's globally impacting a huge number of people, particularly women and children.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And yeah, I think the one, the question of children for me interests me because I'm from a multi-generational group, and so there are children and people of all ages impacted when somebody's shunned on the inside as well as on the outside. It's obviously also devastating for those on the inside who lose a family member who's often a loved family member, and especially for children trying to understand why grandpa's just disappeared, or why mummy's disappeared and is now so wicked, and we can't speak to her or see her and have to hide photos of her. Like, those are devastating things for children to come across. And actually, I've been meaning to mention it on Cult Chat for a while, and I don't know if I have, but there are two books that I've come across as a parent reading them to my children, and I've thought, oh my goodness, this deals with shunning. Just about, that it can relate. So I'll put them in the show notes, but one of them is the very well-known book Star-Bellied Sneetches by Dr. Seuss, and it talks about how some have got stars on their bellies and some don't, and they think they're better than the other ones, and then they all go through this process of it's just that insider outsider thing. So that can be a helpful one for parents to read to children, or for adults to read to children impacted by shunning. And another one I recently came across is called The Little Mouse and the Red Wall. And it's about a little mouse who wants to see over this huge red wall, and everyone around her says, no, the wall's always been there. Like, you mustn't, there's no world outside of the red wall. You mustn't ask questions about it. And then she eventually does go over the red wall. So that could be another one that I'll just sort of mention it for parents who are trying to help children to understand what's going on if they're being impacted by shunning. Yeah, so I'm going to shift gear briefly here and ask about, actually, let's just chat a wee bit more about, you've talked about growth, that, some of the positive things that can come for when people leave, but yeah, have you got any, I guess, encouragement or hope that you can offer people who are still working through some of the deep challenges from shunning around, what hope or encouragement can you offer them, or what things have you seen people do that is beneficial for them in terms of coping mechanisms or helping to facilitate their growth?
I think recognize that your journey, because you are on a journey, it's an individual one. The first thing is recognize that you are not alone in this. To reach out for other groups, and there are many groups on social media. Reach out, find also support groups. Do speak to a therapist, and we know that can be an issue. So many participants in our study they did report that going to speak to somebody, sometimes they often feel that they have to explain everything to the therapist, or they found it unhelpful because they made an intervention that makes them feel invalidated or not understood. And what I would say is, do not give up. There are therapists out there, and it's very important that you find one that you feel comfortable with. It's not, they may often not understand fully, but if you feel that you are comfortable, you are understood, and you feel safe, it's very important. But just don't give up. It sometimes takes time to find the right therapist. Another one, a key one for me, is be compassionate to yourself. Compassion is the biggest thing that you can give to yourself. Build a good relationship with yourself. Allow yourself to give yourself the things that you felt you didn't have. And for me, that is the key things.
Yeah, it's I found fascinating the way some participants reframed, this experience, saying that it's a journey, and it's a journey of discovery. I remember one participant saying, we were used to have this tunnel vision, and now we see in Technicolor.
Yes, that's
And
cool.
it's beautiful. Again, it's a journey, and it's a challenging journey. But I think that human beings are great because we are able to reframe the experience, or challenging experiences. And again, this can be an opportunity to conquering, for example, existing fears. This was a theme that our findings highlighted. An opportunity to also reframe, a mindset that was ingrained in the individual, and rebuild it. So again, yes, it's difficult, can be difficult, challenging, but there is a support, as Sabina highlighted, and there is an opportunity to rediscover oneself, which is great.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So reframing and rediscovering, yeah, those are powerful concepts. Yeah. Thank you. So to shift gear a little bit, there's a group that I've heard about internationally, had a look on their website, called Shunning is a Crime, or I think they were known as Stop Mandated Shunning, and you've had some collaboration with them. Is there anything you'd like to share about them? I mean, it's a big call to say, when I saw their title, Shunning is a Crime, that's a big, bold statement to say that something like shunning is actually, a crime. I thought, wow, that's very bold. So tell me about that. Why have you been happy to collaborate with them? Do you think that shunning is a crime? Yeah, love to hear a few thoughts on that.
So, shunning is harmful, and there is a need to stop this practice. So this Stop Mandated Shunning is a global campaign, and their aim is to raise awareness and educate people on the dangers and impact of coercion and control, and shunning, and to create a legal definition of mandated shunning. So this is extremely important. So it has become a kind of forum where people can share their experiences, it's a way to give a voice to people that have been shunned, and when you are shunned, you can't communicate with your social network. So sharing your experience is extremely important, because it's a way to raise awareness, to let people know about the challenges you are experiencing, about the impact of this practice. So yes, we are collaborating with them in a common effort to raise awareness of this practice, of the impact, considering the psychological implication, and considering also the human rights violation.
I think also one of the greatest things that Stop Mandated Shunning has done is to try to bring a legal definition on mandated shunning to have a legal impact. And I think they've been great in collecting the experiences of people who have been shunned through the stories, to just bring into awareness how many people actually been impacted by this, because many people do not know, where do you go to tell your story?
Yeah.
Where do you go to talk about something so difficult that you have experienced, where you are left feeling that maybe you are wrong, you have done something wrong, you have been cut off, rejected by the closest ones to you. So And also to go to say that somebody, it's again, you're making, to talk about that vulnerable place where you are, it brings even more vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think it's a great effort in what they're doing.
That's really powerful. Okay, well, I encourage our listeners to look them up, look up their website, and as you say, hear some of the stories and see the work that they're doing. Yeah. Well, we're heading towards nearer the end of this podcast, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about two things. One, Savin, you're a lecturer, is that right? And I'd love to hear, I'm curious, your students that come through, like they've obviously chosen to study something along the lines of this, like this is part of, it's not all of, but part of what you teach about at university. Have you got any reflections on what that space is like?
I am a senior lecturer at Roehampton University. I teach on the Psych-D counseling training program. And I also teach on other programs as well, masters and also undergrad, but mainly contribute to the Psych-D, where I supervise doctoral research students. In terms of contributing, one part that I like about my job at the university is that I've got trainees, therapists that are training to become qualified therapists. So I am always eager to provide them with awareness and perhaps how to be able to therapeutically help people who might have been shunned if they ever come across anyone who has gone through this experience. But what I would ideally have liked would be, and something that I want to come out of our research, is for more tailored training to appropriate professionals. So tailored training for social workers, for police officers, for GP doctors, to be able for them to recognize the signs of that kind of abuse the individual might be going through. And most importantly, primary school teachers, because children do show signs. And I feel that those professionals are not provided with any awareness, let alone training on how to appropriately help somebody. So that's one of my long-term goals in terms of our research.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. I really love that. And it's very exciting to hear that because, I think, in chatting with you both, I feel really like here for me personally, but as well here in New Zealand, we're following in your wake, we're following in the path that you guys are carving out. So, it's really exciting to hear of this kind of research and work that you're doing and of your passion. And so on that note, would you like to tell us a little about your current research project that you're doing?
Yeah, our research, we are looking at mandated shunning qualitatively and quantitatively. So the qualitative part, I think Windy mentioned earlier, we are interviewing former members of any high controlling faith-based group. So we're not specifically looking at one particular faith or religion, but generally because we do see more and more that the tactics that are used and the use of mandated shunning is the same.
Yeah.
For the quantitative part, we want to actually quantitatively, because there's not been a study to this extent, quantitatively document the psychological impact, long-term and short-term, of mandated shunning. And in addition to that, we also have developed a inventory, which is to assess the level of coercive and control an individual has experienced. So this is something new. There is other inventories that look at religious abuse or faith abuse. This tool that we have designed is particularly looking at the tactics of coercive and control that the person has experienced within that context. So our aim is to validate this inventory, and we're hoping that this could be used as a tool by professionals in the future to actually assess the level of coercive and control the individual has experienced, and then be able to help and intervene in an appropriate way to help that particular person. Because I can't emphasize enough, even though that the tactics of abuse can't be the same. The way that it impacts a person can vary.
Yeah.
And our aim is to document, and we're hoping that it will have impact in supporting people that have experienced this, but most of all to prevent it. That's our key goal. But the prevention part is the long term, because up to now, the research in this area is in its infancy. We still don't know much.
That's fascinating. And will you be taking research participants from globally, or is that just in the UK?
No, globally.
Globally.
So this a quite bold
Yes.
research project, because yes, the aim is to document globally the impact of this practice. And that's also the reason why we are looking at experiences across several groups or organizations that practices shunning, not focusing solely on one group. So yes, we are collecting data from all around the world.
If anybody's willing to participate, I want to just say, because for some people the term mandated shunning might sound a little bit alien, and do I belong? Have I experienced that? So if you feel, if you are somebody who has been in a high control group, and just by vocalizing your own views, people stop talking to you, they have cut you out, then we would like to hear about your experience.
Okay, we'll share some of those links in the show notes to our listeners and viewers. So do check that out, or pass it on to people who may be interested in participating as well. But yeah, that'll be really exciting to see the outcome of that project. So well done to you both. A huge thank you again to you both for staying up late on your Friday night, not to party or to relax, but to talk about some pretty heavy topics with us for a cult chat and for our New Zealand listeners. So a huge thank you. It is a real gift to us.
Thank you again for this opportunity, for sharing something about our research, about this important topic, and yes, it has been really a pleasure.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Wendy said. Thank you for having us.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to hearing more about your research in the future. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Ka kite anō. Bye. Welcome back, ladies. So what did you think about that? Was there anything surprising? Was there anything that you wished I had asked?
Oh, no, I think you did a wonderful summary. It was a really engaging conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think it's so important when we really most people have no idea of how huge this is. They've got no way to visualize it. They've got no way to get into the mindset of a person who's experienced this really, in many ways, quite unusual experience. So you guys did a fantastic job of pulling out the details. I particularly appreciated the analogy to the tree bending over. I can't remember who it was. Was it Savin said that, it's not about the resilience. It's not about the bending branch that then just sort of snaps back up again. It's chopping the branch off and having to grow another, and that is it's both heartbreaking and it's a strong image, because that's what's required, but that's the cost as well. So yeah. How about you, Liz?
Oh yeah, that branch thing really stuck out at me, because it takes a long time to grow a new branch, and so that reflects the amount of intense damage done when shunning occurs. So it's a very, very slow journey out. And it was great to finish with that message of hope that there is a journey to regrowth. But honestly, the damage done when that tree is cut off and the hacking occurs, it is, I agree, an utter violation of human rights. It's so inhumane. And I think some of the words that were thrown around just say it all: traumatic, dramatic, those
Destruction.
kind of words. Yeah. They're real words. But Lindy, you've experienced this. Can you give us some words? I mean, there were big words: bereavement, and can you tell us of the feeling and the depth of it and the horror of it?
Yeah, all those words, synonym list. Yeah, it is. And you do, I think you do find yourself in a strange situation when you've gone through it because, particularly, for me, it was 16 years ago now, and at that time, like I think there was less awareness of it than there is now, partly due to literally just the rise of the internet and social media and just there's just so much more ability now for stories to be shared about things that even 15 years ago that level of sharing and awareness raising wasn't there. And yeah, it is very hard to describe something like shunning. And so even when you meet people, you go out and, maybe get employment or maybe you join another church that's not as extreme and, you say, oh, they say, where have you come from? And you say, oh, I've left the brethren. And you don't sit there and say, oh, I've just gone through this incredibly identity changing, soul destroying, destructive trauma. Here I am. You don't lead with statements like that, and you don't even know how to put words to it yourself usually at the time. And so, yeah, you just say, yeah, I left the brethren. And most people, if they don't understand it, they say, okay, that's nice. And what are you having for lunch, kind of thing. And you don't go there. Yeah, so that's one weird aspect of it is that no one around you necessarily recognizes how traumatic it is. And often you yourself also don't yet have the words or the awareness of all the profound ways that it is impacting you and is going to continue to impact you for many, many years. I just recently, just bringing to mind, just met a man last week who was a former member of the Brethren, and he's a grown older man who left a fair while ago now, but he spoke about just being in the store recently and saw, a lovely little child run up to their clearly a grandparent and the grandparent give them a big squeeze and how he just emotionally just was hit with this wall of grief
Yeah.
and burst into tears and had to leave the store. And that just came out of nowhere for him, but he'd lost grandchildren and of a similar age as when he last saw them, a couple of decades earlier. And yeah, so it's those sorts of things that nothing can kind of prepare you for that, some of those unexpected aspects of the long-term effects of shunning and grief and the trauma. Yeah.
So that, yeah, the period of mourning they spoke about and grieving the leaving and the post-traumatic stress and the symptoms that come with the shunning. How was that for you? What did that process look like?
Yeah, oh, it's hard to summarize. But yeah, I think for me, I think one of the things that I do sometimes bring up, yeah, it came up at the therapist training with Dr. Gilly Jenkinson in October, because her wonderful, wonderful book, Walking Free, it is a wonderfully comprehensive and well-researched book. It's based around a lot of retrospective work around the historical leaving act and what happened historically. Whereas for those of us who have experienced shunning, you're living with a present continuous reality, and a present continuous grief. Yeah, and you're looking to your future. Like for me, I knew that when we started talking about having children, I was like, I know that there's going to be a whole lot of grief that comes up for me,
Yeah.
if I have children around not having their grandparents and their cousins and all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I actually booked myself in for therapy before that to try and
Wow.
tackle all that stuff before it came. Because, yeah, so it's weird that present continuous future side of things that if you leave a high control group and get shunned, that that is going to be some baggage that you have to carry for the rest of your life. And there's no escape from that.
Thank you. You've really just hit on the present and future nature of rejection. How do
Mm.
you heal from this rejection when it's ongoing? The person is still alive. It's not like death. Death has a finality. Social death, living, breathing.
Mm.
Like you see people in the street. How does that feel when they turn their head from you and walk on the other side? What does that do to you? Doesn't matter how many
I,
years you've been out of the group.
yeah, I do remember speaking with another man who, and I think we were talking about, an encounter that someone had had with a family member who was still part of a group, and that family member had cried, or there'd been some emotional expression. And this man said to me, what's actually worse is when they can look at you and their face is just so completely devoid of expression. And he had spoke of seeing that, of coming across his mother a couple of decades after leaving, face to face, a close encounter, and of his mother looking at him, but just being so completely emotionally detached that there was barely even a flicker of recognition, and she turned and walked away. And he said that was like almost even more soul destroying. And it makes me think of, if you guys haven't looked up the still face experiment, you've probably heard of it. It's something that's kicked around attachment theory discussions, but it's well worth looking up on YouTube. It's a brief video called the still face experiment, where it was done very ethically, but they got young children and babies and put them in a room, and then video recording them and analyzing what would happen if, the mother is playing with them and interacting with them and smiling, but then if their face just went still. And they videoed what different children, and from different types of nurture and background, how they responded to the face of the parent just going completely still. And no matter what the kid did to try and get their attention, some would try and be cute or play peekaboo, and some would cry or act out, but just it always had this immediate and negative effect on the baby or the child. It's actually quite gut-wrenching to watch. But it reminds me of that, because that is what mandated shunning requires. It requires a still face, a still heart, a still mind, just, and
nothing. even from children. And that's the bit that, like, it was mentioned in the interview, but the devastation of requiring a child to cut off a loved one. They don't even understand it, but they understand the threat to themselves if they don't do it. Like the insecurity, the instability of their whole world, to know that you can be rejected by the people who keep your life going, who you're utterly reliant for survival on. I'm just trying to imagine, like some equivalent, like maybe being in a war zone, or living in a refugee camp, or going through war, or suffering a huge natural disaster, or something that is equivalent in terms of the severity of the loss or trauma. And I really can't come up with anything that is equivalent to this in terms of the ongoing, persistent, unremitting social death. Even a recruited member can't have the same degree of social death as someone who was born and raised. Because if you're recruited into a group, you have other people outside the group that you can reform connections with. But as someone who's born and raised loses everything all in one go, and keeps losing that every Christmas, every birthday, every birth of a child,
every time they see someone from that group.
And so too do those people inside have their hearts hardened in this most unnatural and cruel way. And
one of the ladies at Gloryvale spoke to me about that, an older lady, and she actually had a really lovely, we had a beautiful conversation a while ago, and she said, I've come to understand the pain that people who have left feel. We're hearing a lot about that. But she said, nobody's talking about the pain that we feel, us mothers who are left in this group, who have had to cut our children off. And I thought, wow, that was brave of her to be saying that to me. Someone who's seen as the enemy in Gloryvale. This was a woman in there.
So true. I think there's, just like profound levels of really similar trauma for the people on the inside. It's not quite the same, because they still have their family members in their community, but they have also lost a loved one. And I love, Kaz, how you always highlight and think of the children and what does this do to children, because we tend to so easily overlook them and easily overlook the impact that their little minds and hearts are forming these deeply held beliefs and experiences about how the world works and how relationships work. And yeah, for
Mm.
them to have people disappear is incredibly hard. And it's yeah, I was just thinking when you were trying to think of examples, I was thinking maybe having a family member go to jail is a similar thing, partly because of that sense of like they're also black, you know, their name is mud, that they are yeah, someone who's committed this heinous crime
That's right.
in the community.
That is that, and they have difficulty being accepted again by society, and they've got this huge shame to carry. So it maybe is similar in some ways, though they can form relationships in prison, you know, like they're not alone in such a clear way. Yeah.
Yeah, and the shunning, there's indoctrination that goes with that. And a hopeful disciple recently was chatting to a group, and he said that he remembers his baby being born, and he looked at that baby and he thought, I'm going to have to give you up one day. I have to be prepared to give you up one day, because you just know that if this kid at any point grows up and leaves the community, I have to give you up. And so what does that do? Destroying attachment. And what does that do to someone? You think about all the typical behaviors that follow someone who leaves a group who is ostracized and shunned. Yeah, and then there's just the outcomes of it. You look at these kids who have experienced this sort of shunning. They've left the group, there's been shunning, and then the impacts, the binge drinking, the drug taking, the sexual encounters, and what did one of the guests say? They say they're not doing it for the sake of these behaviours. It's a coping mechanism to numb the pain.
Yeah.
What's
To self-soothe.
The pain is rejection.
Yeah. Self-soothing, destructive behaviors that's self-soothing, because they're not getting any soothing any other way by any other people. And the pathway through those behaviors is not great. The other thing I was thinking about was normally when you suffer loss and devastation, like some of the examples we described, or even just say a tragic death where you lose multiple people that you care about, like a huge car accident, you're not often kind of left with this deep and certain belief that it all happened because of you, because it was your fault, that you did everything wrong. And I think that's the sort of another cruel aspect of this, is that the shunnee is actually taught to believe that they are the perpetrator, and the actual perpetrator, the shunner, is left righteous, you know.
Yes. And don't they love it when the person leaves and is shunned, and then their life goes downhill on a slippery slope downwards? I mean, so expected when you've been stunted inside a cult, that when you get out, you know, set up to fail. And then the group has the audacity to use it as an example and say, see what happens when you leave? That angers me no end. I want to shout from the rooftop, see how much damage you do to people. See how you've ruined people. I can't stomach it.
You take away a person's deepest needs, that those, as Kaz outlined earlier, those deep, profound needs for acceptance and anchoring and security and belonging. You take them away and then turn and point the finger and say, look at you, the devil's got you, or you're just mentally unwell, or you're an immoral person because you're self-medicating in certain ways. It sort of adds, it really does kick a person when they're down. It's incredibly hard.
It is. And I guess, you know, to show a passion there, because it's just something I'm seeing with those we're working with within Gloryvale. It's all too real for us. It's just too real. It's too real for them. But you know what? We always finish with a message of hope, and we have to, don't we? Because how do you get up in the morning if there's no hope for a future, that something could be better? And so in that grieving process, people can somehow, and I don't know how they do it, but they do. Look at you, Lindy. You've journeyed through. And I loved the way the lady said they just need to be reminded it's a journey of discovery. You're not alone. There are support groups there. There are therapists. Help therapists understand. Be compassionate to yourself. And the one that really struck me was reframing the challenging experience, looking at it and saying, this is an opportunity to conquer existing fears. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to discover a new me, and I'm going to work with purpose and hope that life can be better.
I think we need to wrap up now, don't we?
Yes, but we need to talk first about the website. So, in part of the discussion, shunning is a crime movement. It's actually called Stop Mandated Shunning. So head to their website, Stop Mandated Shunning. And on that website, you'll find a lot of information. There'll be information there on Norway, Jehovah Witnesses, and some things going through the courts there, where they actually lost their charity status because of the shunning and involvement of children. So go and read about it. Join the movement. There's a Facebook page. And you will find on there the information about the research that Windy and Savin are conducting, and they would like participants. And, I love their goal. Their main goal, to prevent mandated shunning. And that's our call. Let's all say it together. Let's say stop.
Yes, stop mandated
shunning. Yeah. We need to shout it from the rooftops. All right, everyone, we need to wrap up episode 2. Make sure you join us for episode 3. We've got another special guest who has a personal story of shunning, someone who's written a book. We won't give you any more clues, but make sure you join us for episode 3 of the shunning series. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us. Like us, send us an email to info@cultchat.org.nz. Get on our Facebook page, spread our YouTube clips around, and thanks to Plains FM for broadcasting us. All right, everyone, over and out from me.
Ka kite anō. We'll see you later.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.